Hello, in this video I'm going to look at Cindy Watts's book, All My Broken Pieces. So I'm going to look at chapter 3 and take it just paragraph by paragraph and give you my opinion on what I think she's saying, you know, what's being said under the surface. So the first paragraph, like every other family, when their adult child falls in love, it wasn't going to matter what we thought about their kid's new love interest. What would matter is what we said, which if you ever want to have a continuing relationship with your child, better be nothing at all. So that's what we did. So there you get the sense that Cindy thinks that it's dangerous to speak her mind. She's aware of that. You know, she's aware that that if she says what she thinks, it can ruin a relationship. And the way she's framing it is as if this is the case with everyone, that every parent finds themselves in this situation. If you like your child's love interest, then why would that ruin your relationship with them? That doesn't really make sense. So, but the impression she's giving is you just can't get it right. You know, whatever you say is probably going to be the wrong thing, so you better just shut your mouth, which suggests that everyone's children are just really high maintenance, you know, that they're really hypersensitive to this kind of thing. And that she's a good parent because she picks up on this and she realizes that it's really, you need to be very careful of what you say and you're best off just not even speaking. Which obviously makes everyone's children just look really unreasonable. She's putting all of the responsibility on the person she will say her judgment to, not on herself for actually having these judgments in the first place. So already Cindy is bringing up the concept of judgment, of her potentially being judged in the first paragraph. So the next paragraph, she says, I mean, who knows? People on the internet call me a crazy possessive mother. And Chris seemed to allude to that a little bit in his first interview. My mum was a little hesitant. The detective jumped in. Yeah, losing her baby and all. He shrugged and smiled. I have to admit I was a little taken aback by his answer, because this was just a few weeks after Shanann had written about me on Facebook, and she'd written a lot, saying, amongst other things, that Sarah was the golden child and that Chris was always second. Sometimes you really can't win. The simple truth is that I have always been crazy about both our kids, and so is Ronnie. I think what she wants to say is I really love Chris. And I think that the message she wants us to get is that he wasn't emotionally neglected as a child, that she shouldn't be held responsible for bad parenting. You know, that because a lot of people have been wondering what kind of mother was she, bearing in mind the way that Chris Watts has turned out. And Chris's remark that his mum was a little hesitant, which is barely really criticism. And from what I understand, it's the truth. She has the, you know, she remembers that exactly as it happened. She remembers exactly how the detective reacted and what he said, because it's really important to her, because it's a judgment about her. And so she wants to set her straight and explain that everyone's got it wrong. So, I mean, she's kind of saying the same as what she said in the first paragraph, really, that she can't win. She's doomed to being judged, and just how unreasonable people are, really. Another thing that jumps out at me is the way that Cindy Watts says that this interview happened just a few weeks after Shanann had written about her on Facebook, and she'd written a lot. So she's saying that she's really uncomfortable with what Shanann was doing, but this may have been a few weeks after that, but it was a few days after Shanann had been murdered. So why is the emphasis on whether Shanann had written something on Facebook about her a few weeks ago? So many things happened in that police interview that really matter. And yet, to her, the first thing she says when she mentions the interview is that Chris Watts said something about her that made her feel taken aback. I get the impression that she thinks that people were watching that interview, hearing Chris Watts say that his mother was a little hesitant, and that then they'll be preoccupied with judging her and thinking about what kind of person she is. When, of course, in reality, people were wondering whether he was going to confess to killing his wife and children, which was slightly more important in that context. But the fact that she's bringing it up here, it seems like she wants to take a situation where she may have been judged and just correct everyone's opinions. It's really inappropriate that she picks the police interview to talk about herself, and that when she does so, when she mentions Shanann regarding this interview, it's about what she'd written on Facebook a few weeks before. It's not about the fact that the police interview was to discuss her murder. A narcissist will make every situation about them. It doesn't matter how clearly it's about someone else. They'll make sure that they'll be seeing it in a way where they are what matters in that situation, and everyone's going to be thinking about them, whether it's positively or negatively. Next, she says, "But yes, I have been extremely close to my daughter, who is an astounding young woman, and who, with our beloved, very nice son-in-law, generously shares time with their children and themselves with us." People don't tend to say things like, "I'm extremely close to my daughter." They might say, "I'm close to my daughter," or "I'm really close to my daughter." But you don't really hear people say, "I'm extremely close to my daughter," or "My daughter's an astounding young woman," or "Our beloved, very nice son-in-law." She's saying, "Look how respectfully I speak about people. Look at how I really like my son-in-law. So that shows that I'm not a judgmental person. I can really like and respect people. And look at how respectful I am about my daughter. That shows what an amazing mother I am, because I have this great relationship with her, and I'm really humble and just grateful for any time she'll spend with us. That's the kind of person I am. That's the kind of mother and mother-in-law I really am." So she's paving the way for us to have the impression that when she starts to talk about Shanann in a negative way, we're going to know that this must be about Shanann and it can't possibly be about her. That doesn't mean I loved her more. We just had more in common. For example, we like to talk to each other. Something Chris and Ronnie definitely had in common was that they did not have to talk much when together. Not that you can talk anyway at drag races or NASCAR, unless you like to speak with bullhorns. I mean, maybe she's making a joke here. Maybe she's making a joke about how what we have in common is that we like to talk, whereas Chris and his dad, they don't talk much. But it sounds really simplistic to me, and like the way that she summarizes what she has in common is that she and her daughter talk. That there's something very surface layer about it, and if it's a joke, then that does explain it in part, that she thinks that this is funny, but it does also I guess remind me about how narcissists don't tend to know people because they're so preoccupied with themselves. They don't tend to really know people on a deep level. If you ask a narcissist to tell you about your character, the chances are, and this is where, when I say that, I mean in the idealization phase, when they're not going to just say really horrible things to you, but even then they don't have a deep insight into someone's character, and they don't really know what makes them tick because they're too preoccupied with themselves and with everyone's perception of them to notice anyone else in any depth. And so when she says that what Chris and his father had in common was that they don't really talk, it just sounds like she's certainly not telling us why they connect. And I wonder if she knows why they connect. And if it's true that they barely speak, that also doesn't really surprise me, because that's sort of what we saw in the police interview when Chris's dad was there. There seemed to be this sort of lack of the communication of any feelings going on. So the way that Chris's dad responded to the news, to Chris saying that Shanann had murdered the children and he'd then murdered her, it was it didn't really show much feeling.
I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, they came back up and they were gone. I don't know, like me talking to her about that. Talking to her about separation and everything, about like when she lost it. I don't know, like what else to say, like I freaked out.
He was immediately on his son's side, really supportive, but there wasn't really, you didn't see much feeling there. And so my impression is that Chris and his father just don't communicate in terms of feelings. And Chris said as much in the interview in March. He mentioned that feelings are not really talked about in his family, and I think that says something, and it's not something that the mother is exploring. She's summarizing that they don't speak, but it's not something that concerns her or that she thinks about or wonders about why that is. Why these two people don't communicate their emotions. Maybe she thinks of it as just a typically male way to behave, but it's quite an extreme one. Because in the situation of the police interview, that was a really extreme situation. And even then, there's not an emotional response coming from Chris's dad. You can see that he empathizes with his son. He puts his arm around him and so on. But there isn't any. He doesn't really show horror or sadness or any great feeling. So Cindy has just told us about this dysfunctional situation without really any awareness that it is dysfunctional, but actually just as in a sort of jokey way, as if we're going to go, oh, yes. Ronnie's closeness to Chris does not mean he loved him more than Sarah. These are just untrue things, and they're hurtful from anyone. There's a good old-fashioned poem about this that I guess everyone could agree on. A daughter is a daughter all your life. A son is a son till he takes a wife. It just means really that you pretty much have to understand and accept that once your kids grow up and marry, that things will be different, and that if you want to see them and to keep the peace, you need to like their choices, whether you do or not, especially if you have grandchildren. So although she says once your kids grow up, she's also made a clear distinction between your son and your daughter, that your daughter will still be your daughter, but your son, you're going to lose him when he gets married. And that's quite interesting, because she was criticizing Chris for for the fact that he said that she had been hesitant to the detective, and she was extremely taken aback and offended that he had said that she'd been hesitant about Shanann. But she's giving us all the signs that she was, and she's now even admitting that she thinks that you lose your son when they get married. So the detective who responded that she's losing her baby, well, he was spot on, and yet the mother just has this big issue with it. Cindy has this big issue with it, because even when she recognises it as correct and says so herself, as long as it comes across as criticism, she can't handle it. Narcissists can't handle any kind of criticism, even the most subtle kind. Given that she's said that your son isn't your son once he gets married, and given that she has a need for him to still be really compliant with her and to do what she wants and to be under her control, who would be suitable for him? It's that age-old cliche, really, isn't it, about nightmare mother-in-laws that it's impossible to please them for the new wife. And if she has these views, who is going to please her unless it's somebody who will be under her control, so that way she can indirectly still control her son? And Shanann wasn't someone who was going to be under Cindy's control. She was someone who would stand up for her. She was someone who would stand up for herself. And also someone who wanted a kind of relationship with her that was going to be more equal. So I think Cindy does think that there's this big issue with Shanann. I think she genuinely thinks that. But from an outside perspective, from a sort of objective and more distant perspective than she has, I think it's quite clear that it wouldn't really take much for Cindy to have a problem with her son's partner. I got lucky with Sarah's Steve, not so lucky with Chris's choice, but I figured it didn't have to be a disaster. We could be polite and friendly, and if so, maybe Ronnie and I would get every Christmas with them, and that's the best any parents can hope for, really. It's also very much about her, how it is for her when she doesn't like her son's partner, and not, you don't get a sense that she wants to make Shanann feel welcome, and that being nice to her is about thinking of how things will be for her or for her son, for Shanann or for Chris. So she doesn't feel any responsibility as Chris's mum or Shanann's mother-in-law to try to build some kind of relationship with Shanann. It's all about, well, if I'm nice and friendly, then I'll see him every other year. So there's a motive to it. You don't hear an attempt to. It doesn't seem that she wants to like Shanann. It just seems that she's sitting back and deciding, does she like her or does she not like her? And she doesn't. She's decided that she doesn't, and she had no choice in the matter. This person was thrust upon her family, but look at what a lovely, humble person she is to be making the best of it and and being polite and friendly. So getting back to then, Chris was obviously in love. We were keeping quiet and going on with our lives. So I mean, even that is just, she was saying, so how nice that is of her to be doing that. But the way it comes across is that there's all this pent up stuff inside her that she's keeping down, and she thinks she's being so nice. with an unreasonable son, that she's not going to be able to speak her mind. By keeping quiet, Cindy is suggesting that there's this big elephant in the room, that Shanann's behaviour is incredibly unreasonable, and that she is doing the right thing by keeping quiet about it, not saying anything, and that's really kind and considerate of her. When in reality, she's creating drama. She's suggesting that there is this massive issue with Shanann, and she hasn't actually given us any, she hasn't really given us any examples of any behaviour by Shanann that most of us would consider to be unreasonable. And so she's assuming that we're on her side, when actually what she's doing is she's showing that she's not considering at all how she's behaving herself is actually unreasonable, and it is because it's manipulative, and it's passive aggressive, because she's not directly talking about her feelings with Chris about Shanann. She's just she's behaving as if she's above it all, and she's so mature and considerate that she's not going there. She's not even going to discuss it. But in doing so, she's making this really big point. And a narcissist they can't question themselves. And she's making that clear. There's no element here of her questioning whether she's being fair to have such a big judgment about Shanann. Instead of what you would think that in that situation, she might be saying, when she says Chris was obviously in love, she might be saying, she might be talking about the positives of Shanann, or how great it was that she was making him happy, or something like that. But it's all about her again, and how she was abiding by the rules of being this great mother because she was keeping quiet. And a few weeks later, Chris called up to tell us that he'd just bought an engagement ring for Shanann, one they had picked out together. And before I could say congratulations, he went on to tell me he had paid $12,000 for it. I have to say I was shocked. $12,000 is a down payment on a house, or he could have paid off his car, or it was $1,000 more than he had in his life savings. And besides, he was an auto mechanic, not Prince William or Donald Trump. So she talks about this engagement ring, and a lot of people would agree that that's a really expensive engagement ring. It is above an average price for an engagement ring. When I read this the first time, I actually looked up what is the average price. What do people spend on average when they buy an engagement ring? And it's about $6,000 at the most. It's between $3,000 and $6,000. So $12,000 is a lot of money, and we know that they were living beyond their means, that Shanann had expensive taste. Cindy doesn't realise that although people might agree with her that the engagement ring was really expensive, it still doesn't quite feel right that she didn't congratulate her son, and that she brought it up then and there. She didn't. This wasn't something she sort of spoke to him about another time. She wasn't aware that this was really bad timing. And also that it wasn't her business. Chris may have sensed that Shanann was going to be impressed with something expensive. She had her own house that she'd worked hard to buy, and she had expensive taste. So he would have known that it would take quite a lot to impress her. I don't know, of course, what the history was in terms of this engagement ring. I don't know what the discussions were, whether she had actually asked for that particular one or not. But either way, we've seen the way he was with Nicole as well, sending these cards, taking her on trips, buying her jewelry very early on in their relationship. And that is how a covert narcissist operates. They put someone on a pedestal, they treat them like an absolute queen or king if they're a man. And so actually that would have suited Chris to have done what he did in terms of this engagement ring. But this is what stands out to her. So they've got engaged, and the thing that's on her mind is how much was the ring? Why was her poor son spending all this money? That's what concerns her. So it's this feeling of this really protective mother who is horrified when her son gets engaged. Is it really that Cindy feels worried about Chris running out of money and protective over her son? Or is there something more to it? I think that that she's seeing things in a skewed light. There's something called schema therapy, which I'm going to talk about more in other videos, but there's a schema that a narcissist has, and a schema is a sort of framework for how we see the world. And a narcissist has a schema called the mistrust abuse schema. And having that schema means that you essentially see the worst in people, and you can mistake their actions for being much darker than they are, for people having ulterior motives all over the place. And I think that what she sees now in her son spending all of this money is not that he loves this person and wants to get something special for them in the kind of lovely way that other people might see it, even if they think it's overly extravagant, and that he's going a bit over the top. I think the way she sees it is that he is under someone else's control, and he's being almost brainwashed to do what he's doing. That Shanann is very demanding and is pretty much forcing her son to do this. She knows that he was very compliant always with her, and that it's going to be easy for him to become compliant with somebody else, and for somebody else to have the power that she wants to have. A narcissist sees their child as an extension of themselves, and so because of that, they expect and want to have full control over their child. So once their child starts to make their own decisions and to lead their own life, that's really threatening to a narcissist, because it's as if a part of them is suddenly out of control and doing its own thing. Bear in mind that she hadn't congratulated him on getting engaged. She said, before I had a chance to congratulate him. So that means that her first reaction when learning about the engagement was horror over what he spent on the engagement ring. And yet, as you'll see, she's completely oblivious to why that would be really hurtful, both for Chris and for Shanann. And she's talking about it in a way that she thinks we're probably going to agree with. We're going to see how reasonable she is, because we'll all agree that this is a lot to spend on an engagement ring. But regardless of that, that's where the emphasis is. It's not on, my son was engaged, how exciting, there's nothing positive here at all about the engagement. It just comes down to criticism of Shanann. And it's just interesting how Shanann was becoming ensnared in his trap, and yet Chris's mother sees things in the exact opposite way, that Chris has just walked into this massive spider web, into Shanann's trap. Maybe what I just said will make people laugh at me, because maybe that's not a lot of money to other people, but it is to our family. I said, son, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. Couldn't you have found something nice for less money? He didn't say anything, and I think I handed the phone over to Ronnie. But I found out later he had told Shanann what I'd said, and she was really angry about it. So Chris Watts knew better than to argue with his mum, it sounds like. He just didn't say anything. And it seems that she wasn't aware that he was even annoyed about anything. Because she doesn't say anything about that. She just says he didn't say anything. And then I got Ronnie. She doesn't say something like, I realised that was actually, that I should have congratulated him. I should have said something, because of course he was annoyed because he didn't say anything. You know, there's no insight from her. And it doesn't occur to her to question herself or how she reacted. And then he told Shanann, maybe Shanann asked, how did your mum react to our engagement? Or maybe he just told her. And of course Shanann was upset. It was probably already obvious to Shanann at that point anyway that Cindy didn't like her, from what she's told us about how she didn't like her and how she was keeping quiet. She probably made it really obvious, and so this would have been really just very very hurtful for Shanann that her mother-in-law didn't have a word of congratulations for the pair of them, and instead was suggesting that it was a massive mistake to have spent so much money on Shanann's engagement ring. She says, I was sorry to hear that, because I'd been trying hard to maintain a relationship with her during this time. By saying I was sorry to hear it, Cindy is suggesting that this was disappointing news. It was unexpected and disappointing that Shanann was angry. When, I mean, I guess firstly, we don't know if she was angry. Cindy does seem to exaggerate and distort things, but even if she was, well, why wouldn't she be? It's going to be a really unpleasant experience to have your mother-in-law criticise the cost of your engagement ring instead of congratulate you and your new, you know, your future husband. So it would be perfectly natural that she's going to be angry and upset. But the way that Cindy frames it is that it's nothing to do with her, you know, saying, well, I was sorry to hear that she reacted like that, because, you know, I've tried so hard. She's trying to put across to us that Shanann has been really unreasonable, and that poor Cindy has all she's ever done is just try. So again, she's just taking no responsibility for the things she says. She's very sensitive to what other people are doing, but she's not sensitive to the way that she comes across at all. Narcissists are in denial about who they really are, and what they do is they project the things about themselves that they don't like onto other people, usually without even realising it. They don't actually know that these are the things that they are. So, for example, Cindy is clearly really high maintenance because it's really important what people say to her. They have to say the right things. She's very easily offended, as we could see from what she said about what Chris Watts said to the detective in the interview. You know, she got really offended, even though she's acknowledged that it's true. And so she's really high maintenance, and what she's doing, I think, is she's projecting that onto Shanann, and she's decided that Shanann is really high maintenance and vain. I'm going to continue in the next video to look at the rest of chapter 3. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.